Origin of the Olmecs. Where did they come from? The question hangs in the humid air of the past, a puzzle that has invited some truly wild speculation over the years. Look at the broad noses and full lips of those colossal stone heads. Some have whispered, could they have been ancient Africans blown across the Atlantic on some forgotten voyage? Others point to stylized dragons and a reverence for jade, wondering if a Shang dynasty fleet somehow found its way from China to the shores of Mexico 3,000 years ago. These ideas are tantalizing, like a good ghost story, but they are ultimately phantoms, born from a reluctance to believe that the indigenous peoples of the Americas could have forged such a staggering civilization entirely on their own. The truth, as we will discover together, is both more grounded and infinitely more fascinating. It's a story not of distant visitors, but of local people grappling with one of the most formidable environments on Earth, and through sheer ingenuity and spiritual will, bending it to their purpose, creating something utterly new in the process. We begin not with an arrival, but with a deep, quiet, and ancient presence in the land itself. I'm glad you're here, wishing you peace, rest, and maybe a little historical inspiration before sleep. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as our story begins in a specific place and time, I'd love to know where and when you're listening from. Feel free to drop your city and local time in the comments below. It's always nice to know where this little bubble of calm is floating out to in the world. Our story, the true story, settles into the heavy, wet blanket of air that presses down on the coastal lowlands of southern Mexico. This is a place where the air itself feels like it has weight, a soupy mixture of heat and humidity that beads on your skin and makes every breath a conscious effort. The land is a tangled emerald green world, sliced through by the slow, muddy meanderings of great rivers like the Coatzacoalcos and the Grijalva. Here, the boundary between land and water is a suggestion, not a fact. For half the year, the sun bakes the earth into a cracked mosaic, and for the other half, the skies open up and the rivers swell, drowning the world in a vast brown sheet of life-giving and life-taking water. The soundtrack to this world is a constant living symphony. The deep, guttural roar of howler monkeys echoing from the canopy like distant thunder, the chatter of unseen parrots, the incessant thrum of insects, and the patient, silent glide of a caiman through the murky water. And somewhere in the deep shadows, seen only in a flash of rosette-spotted gold, the jaguar, the apex predator and supreme spiritual power of this realm, watches and waits. This was the cradle, the impossibly lush, impossibly challenging incubator where the Olmec would be born. But they were not the first. For millennia before the first great stone was ever carved, small bands of people had moved through this landscape. They were ghosts to us now, leaving behind little more than a few scattered stone tools and the faint traces of ancient campfires. They learned the rhythms of this place, the fruiting of the trees, the migrations of the fish, the habits of the tapir and the deer. They understood the river as both a highway and a monster. Around 4,000 years ago, something began to shift. The people began to settle down. Perhaps they were drawn to the rich estuaries, teeming with fish, turtles, and shellfish. More likely, they were beginning to truly unlock the secrets of a humble grass that would one day power empires, maize. Imagine a small clearing, wrested from the jungle's grip. A handful of round huts, their frames of bent poles lashed together with vines, their roofs a thick thatch of palm leaves that whisper and rustle in the slightest breeze. Inside, the air is smoky from a central hearth. The floor is packed earth, cool against the skin. A family, perhaps a dozen people, lives in this space. Outside, a woman grinds maize on a stone matat, the rhythmic scraping sound a constant domestic heartbeat. The corn they grew was not yet the robust crop it would become. Its cobs were small and slender, but it was a promise. It was a food source they could control, a reason to stay in one place. These were the ancestors, people like the Mokaya, who lived just to the south, who were already forming settled villages, making the first crude pottery in Mesoamerica, and perhaps even clearing the first patches of forest for their precious gardens. The central mystery, the question archaeologists still wrestle with, is why here? Why did civilization in the Americas first ignite in this sweltering, flood-prone jungle, and not in the cooler, drier, seemingly more hospitable highlands? The answer, it seems, lies in a paradox. The very challenges of the environment were also its greatest gifts. Those annual floods, which could sweep away a whole village, also deposited a fresh layer of incredibly fertile silt across the riverbanks. This was natural fertilizer, delivered for free every single year. A farmer could plant his maize, beans, and squash in this rich earth and be rewarded with a bounty unimaginable to his highland cousins who had to contend with thin, rocky soil. The rivers themselves were protein factories, offering an endless supply of fish, turtles, and snails. The forest provided deer, peccaries, and birds. This was not a land of scarcity. It was a land of explosive abundance, a place where, if you were clever and organized, you didn't just survive, you thrived. A surplus was possible, and surplus is the fuel of civilization. It frees up hands. It allows some people to stop farming and start thinking, planning, leading, and creating. It allows a man to look at a massive boulder of volcanic stone miles away in the mountains and not just see a rock, but the face of his ruler waiting to be born from within it. The seeds of the Olmec were being planted in the rich, wet earth of the riverbanks, watered by the annual floods, long before the first king would ever claim his throne. This surplus, born from the marriage of fertile river silt and patient human hands, was the secret ingredient. It was the quiet accumulation of energy that allowed for a profound transformation, a leap in human organization that would change the face of Mesoamerica forever. Before, life was a continuous, repetitive cycle of planting and harvesting, hunting and gathering, with little room for anything else. But now, with storehouses holding more corn than a single family could eat in a year, new possibilities began to shimmer in the humid air. Someone had to manage the surplus, to protect it, to redistribute it. Someone had to appease the powerful rain and river gods who made it all possible. And someone had to organize the grander projects that this new era of abundance seemed to call for. A new kind of landscape was needed, not just a physical one, but a social one, a map of power and prestige laid over the winding rivers and swamps. This geographical stage, the place historians now call the Olmec heartland, became the petri dish for this grand experiment. Imagine drawing a rough rectangle on a map of modern-day Mexico, covering the southern curve of the Gulf Coast. It would stretch across about 18,000 square kilometers, a territory smaller than the state of New Jersey, encompassing the bottom of Veracruz and the western edge of Tabasco. This was the Olmec world, their entire universe for 1,000 years. It was a land defined by water. To the west, the Tuxtla Mountains, a cluster of ancient volcanoes, stood as a jagged purple-green wall, the only significant high ground in the entire region. From their slopes, countless streams and rivers were born, growing fat and slow as they unspooled across the coastal plain, eventually braiding themselves together into a complex network of watery arteries before sighing into the Gulf. This circulatory system of rivers was the lifeblood of the heartland. The land itself was a low-lying alluvial plain, a colossal drainage basin, meaning it was almost entirely flat, a landscape of profound horizontality, broken only by the towering ceiba trees and the occasional, almost imperceptible rise of a natural levee. The genius of the people here was in recognizing the trinity of power that this unique geography offered. First, and most obviously, were those alluvial plains themselves, which we touched upon before. Remember that annual flood? For the emerging Olmec, it wasn't a natural disaster. It was a scheduled delivery of the finest topsoil imaginable. They became masters of floodplain agriculture, developing a sophisticated understanding of the river's pulse. They knew precisely when to plant their maize as the waters receded, leaving behind a slick, nutrient-rich carpet of mud that needed no plows and no irrigation. This wasn't just farming, it was a partnership with the river, a system so productive it created the critical mass of food and population needed for the fires of civilization to catch. The second element of the Trinity lay to the west, in those Tuxtla Mountains. The mountains were their quarry, their great open-air hardware store. While the heartland itself was a place of soft earth and living things, it was almost entirely devoid of stone. The Tuxtlas, however, were made of basalt, a hard, dark, volcanic rock. It was from these mountains that Olmec laborers, with breathtaking effort, would quarry the colossal, multi-ton boulders for their famous sculptures. One can only imagine the scene. Hundreds of men using stone hammers and the strategic application of fire and water to crack a 20-ton block free from the mountainside. The sheer logistics of this are a source of constant debate and wonder. How did they move these behemoths? The leading hypothesis is that they painstakingly dragged them on sledges over land to the nearest navigable river, then loaded them onto immense balsa wood rafts during the high water season, floating them as far as 100 kilometers to their cities. It was an undertaking that required not just brute force, but incredible coordination, engineering skill, and a social structure capable of commanding and feeding such a massive labor force for months, if not years. The mountains provided the raw material for permanence, for legacy. The third gift of the heartland was the staggering biological diversity of the jungle itself. The forest was a walking pantry, a pharmacy, and a department store all in one. It offered the timber for their homes and dugout canoes, clay for their pottery, and fibers for weaving cloth and nets. It was home to the animals that populated their dinner tables, and more importantly, their spiritual world, the clever monkey, the formidable caiman, the venomous snake, and of course, the jaguar. But there was one tree among all others that was special, the Castilla elastica, the rubber tree. The Olmec, whose very name is a later Aztec word, Olmecatl, meaning rubber people, had learned to slice into the bark, collect the sticky white latex, and mix it with the juice from a specific vine to create a bouncy, durable rubber. They fashioned this miraculous substance into solid balls, some as large as basketballs, which were central to a sacred game that was part ritual, part sport, a tradition that would last for 3,000 years across Mesoamerica. Upon this stage, on the slightly higher ground that offered some protection from the floods, the great Olmec centers began to rise. San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes. They weren't cities in the way we think of them, not sprawling metropolises of houses and shops. They were regal ceremonial centers, architectural expressions of power and faith. They were complexes of earthen mounds, plazas, and pyramids, their layouts often aligned with specific cosmological principles. Here resided the rulers and the priests. Here, artisans carved the great stone heads and delicate jade figurines. And here, tribute, in the form of food, goods, and labor, flowed in from the hundreds of smaller villages that dotted the surrounding riverbanks, the people who worked the land and fed the elite. It's a mystery whether this was a unified empire ruled from a single capital, or more likely, a collection of competing chiefdoms, each centered on its own sacred site, each vying for control of the best river routes, the most fertile lands, and access to the sacred stone of the mountains. The evidence suggests a shifting landscape of power, a place where a great center could rise to prominence for a few centuries, only to be eclipsed by a rival, its monuments mysteriously and violently laid low. In this shifting landscape of rival powers, one center was the first to truly explode in scale and influence, becoming the prototype for all that would follow. It was a place known to us as San Lorenzo. For about 300 years, from roughly 1200 to 900 BCE, it was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the Olmec heartland, the largest and most complex settlement, not just in the region, but in all of Mesoamerica at the time. Its story begins not with the laying of a stone foundation, but with the moving of a mountain of earth. The site itself is a testament to an almost unbelievable level of human determination. The early Olmec chose a prominent ridge, rising some 50 meters above the floodplain of the Coatzacoalcos river system. This gave them a crucial advantage, a natural island of safety during the rainy season's deluge. But they were not content with what nature had provided. Over generations, they undertook one of the largest engineering projects of the ancient world. Imagine thousands of people working with nothing more than woven baskets, stone tools, and their own muscle power. They dug into the sides of the hill, loosening tons of earth, which they then packed into baskets and carried load by agonizing load to fill in gullies and low spots. They were sculpting the very land itself, reshaping the entire ridge into a vast artificial plateau, a sacred effigy platform whose precise shape is still debated. Some see a giant bird flying east to west, its wings spread wide in the form of long, projecting ridges. They moved an estimated 2.5 million cubic meters of earth to create this monumental base for their capital. It was an act of immense will, a declaration etched into the land itself that this place was special, the center of their world, a man-made mountain that brought them closer to the gods and lifted them above the chaos of the mortal world below. As this great plateau took shape, San Lorenzo swelled into a bustling hub of activity. This was the political capital, the religious sanctuary, and the economic engine of the early Olmec world. Atop the flattened summit, the elite lived in a style that was utterly alien to the farmers in the surrounding villages. Archaeologists have found the remains of what they call the Red Palace, a large structure with floors and walls coated in red-painted plaster, supported by massive columns carved from basalt, each one weighing more than a ton. It was a place of cool, shadowed interiors, a refuge from the oppressive sun, and running through the heart of the ceremonial precinct was one of the Olmecs' most astonishing achievements: a sophisticated drainage system, or perhaps a system for ritual water transport. They carved hundreds of U-shaped troughs and basins from solid basalt, fitting them together with precise mortise and tenon joints, and covering them with lids, creating a network of stone pipes that channeled water across the plateau. Was this simply a practical solution to the problem of torrential downpours on a clay and earth surface? Or was it something more? One can easily picture these channels being used in sacred rites, guiding pure spring water to ritual pools where the ruler and priests could perform acts of purification, the controlled flow of water, a symbol of their power to mediate with the supernatural forces that governed their world. It was likely both practical and sacred, for in the Olmec mind, the two were never truly separate. Managing the earthly world was a sacred duty, and managing the sacred world had very practical results, like a good harvest. The existence of this system, like the moving of the mountain of earth itself, speaks to a society that was highly organized, with rulers who could command not just laborers, but also highly skilled engineers and masons who understood hydraulics and stoneworking on an impressive scale. But this raises a profound question that lies at the heart of the San Lorenzo mystery. How did they do it? How did a small elite convince thousands of people to dedicate their lives and their children's lives to such colossal, non-essential projects? There is no evidence of city walls or fortifications, no suggestion of a powerful army forcing people to work at spear point. The prevailing theory is that the power of San Lorenzo's rulers was not primarily military, but ideological. They were not just kings, they were shaman lords, individuals believed to possess a direct and powerful connection to the supernatural realm. They were seen as the guarantors of the cosmic balance, the success of the crops, the coming of the rains, the appeasement of the jaguar god. All of this rested on the shoulders of the ruler and his ability to perform the correct rituals. From this perspective, the labor was not slavery. It was an act of communal faith. When a farmer left his fields to spend a season hauling dirt up the side of the great plateau, he was doing his part to uphold the order of the universe. When a team of men spent years rafting a giant boulder from the Tuxtla Mountains, they were not just transporting a stone, they were bringing home the sacred vessel that would become the living image of their divine Lord. This power of belief, the collective agreement that the rulers were essential to the world's functioning, was an invisible force, far stronger than any army. It was this faith that built San Lorenzo, basketful by basketful, and transformed a simple earthen ridge into the throne of the most powerful lineage in their world, a place guarded by the stoic, giant stone portraits of the very rulers who had willed it into existence. And it was these very rulers, these shaman lords, who held the cosmos in balance, whose faces stared out across the plazas of San Lorenzo. They are the most famous, the most enigmatic, and the most undeniably powerful works of art the Olmec ever produced, the colossal heads. To look upon one, even in the sterile calm of a modern museum, is to feel a sense of profound weight, not just the physical tonnage of the stone, but the sheer gravity of its presence. 17 of these incredible portraits have been found to date, 10 of them from the ruins of San Lorenzo alone. They are true colossi, the smallest standing about 5 feet tall, the largest looming over 11 feet and weighing anywhere from 6 to 50 tons. Each one was carved from a single massive boulder of that dark gray basalt, a material born of volcanic fire, hauled with superhuman effort from the distant Tuxtla Mountains. They are not stylized, generic faces of gods or demons. They are unmistakably human, portraits of individuals. Though they share a certain family resemblance, the slightly crossed, almond-shaped eyes, the broad noses, the full, fleshy lips often caught in a slight, almost imperceptible snarl, no two are identical. Each face has its own character, its own mood. Some appear serene and meditative, others stern and commanding. The subtle contours of a cheek, the particular curve of a lip, the set of the jaw, all speak to a master carver's effort to capture a specific likeness. They are so personal that you feel if you could travel back in time 3,000 years and walk the plazas of San Lorenzo, you would recognize these men instantly. And they were almost certainly men, powerful rulers who sat at the apex of the Olmec world. Each figure wears a distinctive, snug-fitting headpiece, often described as a helmet. These are not crowns of delicate feathers and jade, but thick, protective headgear, perhaps made of leather or padded cotton. They are often adorned with incised symbols, perhaps the emblem of a particular lineage or a patron deity. The most compelling interpretation is that these are the helmets worn for the sacred ball game, that intense and dangerous ritual sport that was a key feature of Mesoamerican life. Participation in the game was a hallmark of the elite, a public performance of strength, skill, and divine favor. These helmets, then, were symbols of royal authority, like a European king's crown and scepter. The heads, therefore, show us the rulers in their most potent public guise, as warrior athletes who competed in the sacred arena, the human embodiment of divine power. The creation of a single head was an undertaking that represented a massive investment of time, resources, and communal faith. Remember that journey of the stone from the mountains, the slow, grinding passage by raft and sledge. This journey was likely a great ritual procession in itself, the raw stone accumulating sacred power as it moved from the periphery to the center of the world. Once it arrived at San Lorenzo, the master carvers would get to work. Their tools were simple but effective, harder stones like chert or quartzite, used to patiently peck and chip away at the basalt, slowly roughing out the shape of a face. Then, using abrasives like sand and water, they would grind and polish the surface, creating the smooth, almost soft-looking texture of the skin. It was a process that must have taken years to complete, the constant tap, tap, tap of stone on stone, providing a steady rhythm in the artisan's workshop. A fascinating and now widely accepted theory adds another layer of meaning to these incredible sculptures. Many archaeologists believe that the colossal heads were not carved from fresh boulders, but were instead recycled from another potent symbol of royal power, the great tabletop thrones. These thrones were massive rectangular blocks of basalt, often with a niche carved into the front, from which a seated ruler is shown emerging, as if from the mouth of a cave, a portal to the supernatural world. The hypothesis suggests that when a great ruler died, his throne, the seat of his power in life, was ritually destroyed or decommissioned. It was then tipped on its side and recarved. The front, with its cave niche, was painstakingly chipped away to become the face. The flat top was rounded into the helmet. The ruler's seat of power in life was thus transformed into his eternal monument in death. It is a beautiful, cyclical idea. The object that defined his earthly authority becomes the vessel for his immortal memory. His face, forever gazing across the sacred spaces he once commanded, a permanent guardian of his dynasty. These were not just sculptures. They were active agents in the political and spiritual life of the city, powerful statements of legitimacy, continuity, and the unwavering presence of the ancestors. This relentless drive to give permanence to the faces of their rulers was just one expression of a much deeper Olmec impulse, the desire to engineer their entire world. The colossal heads were masterpieces of sculpture, yes, but they were also feats of logistics and engineering that boggle the modern mind. This same audacity, this willingness to take on the impossible, was applied to the very ground beneath their feet. They did not simply adapt to their environment. They actively and dramatically reshaped it to conform to their sacred and political vision. Their engineering was not just about building things upon the land. It was about treating the land itself as the primary raw material, a canvas to be carved, molded, and imbued with meaning. Let us return to that great plateau of San Lorenzo, that man-made mountain that was the heart of their early civilization. The scale of this earthwork is difficult to convey in words. The sheer volume of earth and clay that was moved, basketful by basketful, is comparable to the amount of stone used to build the Great Pyramid at Giza in Egypt. But while the Egyptians stacked their blocks high to pierce the sky, the Olmec spread theirs wide, creating a vast, elevated stage for their society. They were terraformers, ancient landscape architects on a pharaonic scale. They built long, straight ridges extending from the main plateau, meticulously leveling surfaces to create plazas and raised causeways. The entire site was a kind of sculpture, one so large that its true form, that of a great bird in flight, could only be perceived from a god's eye view, a perspective they, of course, did not have. This implies their blueprint was not a drawing on paper, but a sacred concept held in the mind, a cosmic map they were determined to lay out on the earth. This mastery over the solid world of earth was matched by an equally sophisticated control over the fluid world of water. For the Olmec, who lived in a land defined by rivers and torrential rains, managing water was paramount to survival and prosperity. We have already glimpsed the elegant, basalt-lined aqueducts of San Lorenzo, a system that was both a practical drain and a channel for sacred rituals. This was not a unique feature. At other sites, Like the slightly later center of La Venta, similar systems have been found, but perhaps the most ambitious water engineering was undertaken at a place called Laguna de los Cerros, nestled near the Tuxtla Mountains. Here, the Olmec constructed a complex system of dams, canals, and large, artificially created reservoirs. This was water management on a regional scale. They were seemingly capturing and redirecting the seasonal runoff from the mountains, perhaps to protect their farmlands from destructive flash floods, or to store vast quantities of water for use during the dry season. It is even possible that these reservoirs were used for a form of aquaculture, a place to raise fish or turtles in a controlled environment, further stabilizing their food supply. Yet the most mystifying and strangely beautiful examples of Olmec engineering were not meant to be seen by human eyes at all. In the sacred precincts of their great centers, they would command work crews to excavate enormous, deep rectangular pits. This was no small undertaking. Some pits were over 25 feet deep. The workers would then line the bottom with a sticky colored clay. Then, the true offering would arrive, thousands of precisely cut blocks of serpentine, a beautiful, waxy greenstone that had to be imported from many miles away. Working from a complex design, the artisans would lay these blocks out on the floor of the pit to create a huge, abstract mosaic, often in the form of a jaguar mask, the face of their most powerful deity. These were massive works of art, some covering nearly 500 square feet, created with precious materials and immense labor. And then, once they were completed, after this brief, perfect moment of existence, they were immediately and deliberately buried. A layer of colored clay was carefully laid over the mosaic, and then the entire pit was backfilled with earth, vanishing from sight forever. What was the purpose of such a monumental yet ephemeral act? This remains one of the great, open questions of Olmec archaeology. It seems the offering was not the finished mosaic itself, but the process of its creation and interment. It may have been a gift to the great earth monster, a supernatural being who was believed to dwell underground. By constructing these beautiful greenstone faces and burying them, the Olmec were perhaps feeding the earth, placing a divine mask upon its chthonic face to ensure its continued fertility. Or maybe it was a way of charging the ceremonial precinct with sacred energy, like burying a divine battery deep beneath a temple to sanctify the ground. Whatever the reason, it reveals a mindset in which the greatest efforts, the most precious materials, were dedicated to acts that had no obvious practical purpose, but were seen as utterly essential to maintaining the delicate balance between the human world and the awesome unseen forces of the cosmos. Every canal dug, every mound erected, every stone moved was part of this grand project to build a world that was a mirror of their beliefs, a stable, ordered island in the midst of a chaotic and powerful jungle. This immense power to reshape the world was not wielded by a committee. The Olmec engineering marvels, from the earthwork plateaus to the buried mosaics, were not the spontaneous creations of a collective will. They were the result of a clear and rigid social hierarchy, a human pyramid as carefully constructed as any of their earthen mounds. At the very top, bathed in the reverence of their people and the smoke of sacred incense, sat the ruler. We can see his face in the colossal heads, his power symbolized in the great stone thrones. He was the central pillar supporting the entire Olmec universe. His authority was absolute, but it was not the thuggish authority of a mere warlord. It was a deeper, more profound power rooted in kinship and cosmology. He was the living descendant of the ancestors and the gods, the one individual who could bridge the gap between the mundane world of mortals and the terrifying supercharged realm of the supernatural. Dressed in regalia designed to transform him into a living icon, his appearance at ceremonies would have been a breathtaking spectacle. Imagine him emerging from the shadows of a temple, his body adorned with the shimmering green fire of jade, beads, ear spools, and a heavy pectoral plaque carved with the face of a god, a magnificent headdress, an intricate construction of precious quetzal feathers would cascade down his back, their iridescence shifting from emerald to turquoise with every movement. Perhaps a jaguar pelt was draped over his shoulders, associating him with the forest's most fearsome predator. He was not just a king, he was a shaman, an individual believed to be capable of transforming himself, of journeying in spirit form to the other worlds that lay above and below the earth to negotiate with the gods on behalf of his people. His every action was imbued with ritual significance, and his home, like the Red Palace at San Lorenzo, was not just a residence, but a sacred space, the axis around which the kingdom revolved. Just below this single, luminous peak was a thin but crucial layer of elites. This was the ruler's extended family, the lesser nobles, and the powerful priests who were the keepers of the sacred calendars, the interpreters of omens, and the masters of ritual. They were the administrators and bureaucrats of the Olmec state. They lived in the well-appointed residences atop the ceremonial plateaus, their lives a world away from the muddy realities of the floodplain. They oversaw the collection of tribute from the surrounding farmlands, carefully tracking the stores of maize, beans, and dried fish that fed the capital. They organized the great labor levies, dispatching orders to the village headmen to send their designated quota of workers for the next great project. They were the stage managers for the grand theater of Olmec religion, ensuring every ceremony was performed with the correct precision. Beneath them, and enjoying a status far above the common farmer, was a burgeoning middle class of artisans and specialists. These were the men whose hands gave form to the Olmec vision. In workshops scattered across the regal ceremonial center, you would find the master sculptors, their arms thick with muscle from the years spent patiently pecking away at basalt, their minds holding the precise memory of the ruler's face. Nearby, lapidary workers used drills made of reed and wet sand to bore impossibly fine holes through beads of jade, the most precious of all materials. Potters, their hands coated in gray clay, formed elegant vessels with incised designs that were both beautiful and full of symbolic meaning. These were not anonymous laborers. Their skills were rare and highly valued. They were supported by the state, fed from the communal storehouses, and freed from the daily toil of agriculture, so they could devote their entire lives to their craft, perfecting the techniques that would be passed down for generations. And then there was the base of the pyramid, the vast foundation upon which everything else rested, the common people. Tens of thousands of them lived in small hamlets and villages, their humble wattle and daub huts spread out along the fertile riverbanks. For them, life was a constant cycle of hard work, dictated by the sun and the seasons. They were the farmers who coaxed the life-giving trinity of maize, beans, and squash from the rich alluvial soil. They were the fishers who cast their nets in the muddy rivers, and the hunters who ventured into the jungle's edge. Their lives were intimately connected to the earth, but the fruits of their labor were not entirely their own. A significant portion of every harvest was owed as tribute to the ruler and the gods he represented. But their most important contribution, the tax that built the Olmec world, was their own time and sweat. When the call came from the capital, the men would put down their farming tools and travel to the great center, where they would join the massive crews that moved earth, dragged stone, and dug the great ritual pits. Their collective muscle power, the engine of Olmec monumentality. It was a system of unequal reciprocity. They gave their food and their labor, and in return, the elites provided organization, justice, and most importantly, a sense of cosmic security, the comforting belief that because of the ruler's sacred work, the sun would continue to rise and the corn would continue to grow. This system of unequal reciprocity was the engine of the Olmec world, but the fuel for that engine was cultivated, caught, and carried by the common people. To truly understand the Olmecs, we must occasionally turn our gaze away from the monumental stone heads and the grand sculpted plateaus and look instead to the small, smoky villages nestled along the riverbanks. We must trade the cool stone of the palaces for the packed earth floors of a humble hut, and listen for the quiet rhythms of a life that, for the vast majority of the Olmec people, had changed little in 1,000 years. Here, in the hazy morning light filtering through the jungle canopy, the real work of civilization was being done. One kernel of corn, one molded pot, one woven thread at a time. An Olmec village was a small, organic clustering of family homes, often just a handful of dwellings, forming a tight-knit community. The houses themselves were marvels of practical, perishable architecture, perfectly suited to the hot, wet climate. The frame was a simple construction of sturdy poles driven into the ground, with flexible saplings woven between them to create a sturdy lattice, a technique known as wattle. This frame was then plastered insides and out with a thick layer of daub, a sticky mixture of mud, clay, and dried grass that baked hard in the sun, creating surprisingly durable and well-insulated walls. The roof was the home's crowning glory, a high, steeply pitched cone or pyramid of expertly layered palm fronds. This design was crucial, allowing the torrential tropical downpours to run off quickly, keeping the interior dry, while the porous thatch allowed the smoke from the central hearth to filter out and the breeze to flow through, providing a measure of relief from the suffocating humidity. A day on the floodplain began before the sun had fully risen, in the cool, gray pre-dawn. The village would stir to life with the crowing of domesticated turkeys and the soft, rhythmic scrape of stone on stone. This was the sound that underscored every Olmec morning. A woman kneeling before her metate, a slanted grinding stone, working the previous day's haul of dried maize kernels into a fine flour or masa. The corn, which had been soaked overnight in lime ash and water to soften it and unlock its vital nutrients, was the literal staff of life. This flour would be patted into flat cakes and cooked on a clay griddle, or wrapped in leaves and steamed to make tamales, providing the essential calories to fuel a day of hard labor. While the women prepared the morning meal and tended to the youngest children, the men would gather their tools, a fire-hardened digging stick for planting, a stone-bladed axe for clearing brush, or a set of nets and bone hooks for a trip to the river. The primary work was agriculture. In the lands farther from the river, they practiced a form of slash-and-char farming, felling a patch of forest and burning the undergrowth not just to clear it, but to enrich the soil with a layer of ash. Here they would plant the sacred trinity of Mesoamerican crops: maize for structure, beans that would climb the cornstalks, and broad-leafed squash that would spread across the ground, suppressing weeds and keeping the soil moist. But the most productive fields were those on the natural levees of the river itself, the lands that received that annual gift of fertile silt, which we've spoken of before. Tending these fields was a constant battle against the encroaching jungle and the pests that threatened the precious crops. Life was not just farming, however. The rivers and swamps were a vast, open larder. Men in long, slender dugout canoes, hollowed from a single massive tree trunk, would paddle the slow-moving waters, casting nets for fish or using spears to hunt the turtles that basked on logs. The forest, too, provided a bounty for those who knew its secrets. Hunters might track the small, pig-like peccary or the elusive white-tailed deer, while others would collect wild fruits, nuts, and edible plants. Their only domestic animal of significance was the dog, a small, hairless breed that was not only a companion, but also, on special occasions, a source of protein. What archaeologists can piece together about their health tells a story of a difficult and often short life. Skeletal remains are rare in the acidic tropical soil, but those that have been found show the toll of their lifestyle. The bones of adults are robust, indicating a life of strenuous physical activity. Their teeth are often worn down from the grit that inevitably got mixed in with their stone-ground maize. Evidence of childhood malnutrition and disease suggests that infant mortality was tragically high. To survive to adulthood was a victory, and a person of 40 would have been a respected elder, their face a map of a long and challenging life. It was a world without our modern understanding of medicine, where a broken bone, a venomous snake bite, or a simple infection could easily prove fatal. Their existence was a delicate balance, an intimate dance with a world that was both a generous provider and a constant deadly threat. It was this precarity, perhaps, that made their faith so strong, their reliance on the rituals of the shaman lords so absolute, for in a world of such uncertainty, cosmic order was the greatest treasure of all. This intimate, often brutal, relationship with the natural world forged a spiritual framework that was equally intense and vital. The Olmec cosmology, the grand map of their reality, was not a detached philosophy for quiet contemplation. It was a desperately needed system for making sense of it all. It gave structure to a world of chaotic forces, provided a narrative for the passing of the seasons, and explained the sudden violence of a flash flood or the silent, creeping threat of a blight on the maize. It was a universe charged with supernatural power, a place where the veil between the physical and the spiritual was impossibly thin and could be torn open by the right ritual in the right place at the right time. For the Olmec, the world they inhabited was but one level of a much grander, three-tiered structure, a cosmic house with a celestial roof above and a watery underworld below. They lived, they believed, On the middle plane, the earthly realm. This was not a spinning globe in their minds, but a flat quadrilateral expanse floating in the void of a great primordial sea. This earthly stage was itself a living entity, often personified as the back of a colossal monster, a crocodilian or caiman, whose rough, scaly hide represented the textured surface of the land. When this great creature stirred in the waters of creation, the earth would tremble. The mountains were its upturned scutes, the caves its open mouth. This was the world of humankind, a place of growth and decay, of struggle and achievement, poised precariously between the two great supernatural realms that bracketed their existence. It was the arena where the great forces of the cosmos played out their dramas, and humanity's role was to watch, to appease, and to maintain the delicate balance through their labor and their faith. Above them stretched the sky, the celestial realm. This was the domain of the sun, a powerful, life-giving deity whose daily journey across the sky brought warmth and light. But it was also the home of the moon, the stars, and the awesome forces of the weather. This realm was often visualized as the domain of a great dragon-like creature, a composite beast with the features of a reptile, a bird, and a mammal who brought the thunder and the rain. The Olmec were keen astronomers, patiently tracking the movements of the planets and the constellations, understanding that the events in the sky above were intimately linked to the cycles of life and death on the earth below. The solstices and equinoxes were not mere astronomical curiosities. They were moments of profound spiritual importance, turning points in the cosmic calendar that demanded ritual attention. And beneath their feet, beneath the solid-seeming earth, lay the third realm, the underworld. This was not a fiery hell of punishment, but a dark, wet, mysterious place, a watery abyss that was both the source of all life and the final destination of the dead. It was seen as a place of immense power, the origin of the springs and rivers that gave them water and the fertile ground from which the maize first sprouted. But it was also a place of danger, a labyrinthine realm inhabited by strange and powerful beings. The entrance to this underworld was a cave, a fissure in the rock, or even the mouth of a great jaguar. It was to this realm that the shaman ruler had to journey in his trances, to confront the gods of death and darkness, to retrieve the secrets of fertility and divination, and to return with the sacred knowledge needed to guide his people. Connecting these three distinct but interwoven worlds was a central axis, a cosmic pillar or axis mundi. This was the conduit through which sacred energy flowed between the realms. Most often, this was symbolized by a colossal ceiba tree, the great world tree. Its roots plunged deep into the watery underworld, its trunk rising through the earthly plane, and its high branches brushing the heavens. But this cosmic axis could also be man-made. The great earthen pyramids they built at their ceremonial centers were artificial sacred mountains designed to replicate this cosmic connection. And most importantly, the ruler himself was a living, breathing axis mundi. In his person, the three realms converged. Through his bloodline, he was connected to the ancestors in the underworld. In his body, he existed in the earthly realm, and through his shamanic power, he could ascend to the celestial plane. It was his sacred duty to keep this channel open and the cosmic energies flowing in harmonious balance. This entire conceptual structure, This three-leveled cosmos connected by a central nexus was such a powerful and compelling idea that it would become the foundational worldview for nearly every major Mesoamerican civilization that followed, from the Maya to the Aztecs. This grand cosmic architecture was not an empty stage. It was teeming with powerful, often terrifying supernatural inhabitants. And among the pantheon of strange hybrid beings that populated the Olmec spiritual world, one figure reigned supreme. It was an entity so central to their beliefs, so pervasive in their art, that it seems to touch upon every aspect of their culture, from kingship and fertility to shamanism and the very origins of their people. We call this enigmatic being the were-jaguar. The name is a bit of a clumsy modern convenience, conjuring images of a simple half-man, half-cat from a monster movie. But the Olmec reality was far more complex, far more nuanced, and infinitely stranger. This was no mere monster. This was the face of the divine. To find the were-jaguar, one has only to look at almost any piece of Olmec art, from the monumental to the miniature. It stares back at us from colossal thrones, from polished jade celts, from ceramic vessels, and from rock carvings hidden deep in sacred caves. The features are unmistakable, a consistent set of motifs that define this supernatural entity. The most prominent is the mouth, a distinct downturned snarl with thick, fleshy lips pulled back to reveal toothless gums, or occasionally a pair of sharp fangs at the corners. It's often called a trapezoidal mouth, and it is the were-jaguar's most definitive signature. The eyes are typically almond-shaped and slanted, often with a trough-like groove running through them, and most curiously, the head is almost always marked with a deep V-shaped cleft at the very top, as if the skull itself were indented or sprouting. Often, this powerful, snarling face is attached to the body of a plump, sexless infant. We see these were-jaguar babies everywhere, their faces contorted in a divine rage or a supernatural cry. They are often depicted as limp and powerless, being cradled in the arms of a stoic, seated adult figure, almost always an Olmec ruler. This juxtaposition of a powerful divine being in the helpless form of a baby is one of the most profound and puzzling aspects of their iconography. It's a riddle carved in stone and jade, and for decades, archaeologists have been trying to decipher its meaning. What then was the were-jaguar? The truth is, we don't know for certain, but there are several compelling theories that each shed a different light on the mystery. One hypothesis is that the were-jaguar, particularly in its infant form, was a powerful rain deity. The snarling, crying face of the baby is seen as a representation of a thunderclap and the subsequent downpour of life-giving and sometimes destructive rain. In a world utterly dependent on agriculture, a god that controlled the rain would have been of paramount importance. The jaguar, remember, was the most powerful creature of the earthly realm, and its deep, guttural roar echoing through the jungle canopy could easily have been associated with the rumble of distant thunder, making it a natural avatar for a storm god. Another interpretation links the were-jaguar directly to the cultivation of maize. In this view, that mysterious cleft in the creature's head is not a wound or a deformity, but a symbol of a sprouting corn kernel, the indentation from which the first green shoot emerges. The were-jaguar, then, becomes a personification of the spirit of maize, the foundational crop that sustained Olmec society. A ruler holding a were-jaguar infant would be making a powerful statement, declaring his sacred ability to guarantee the growth of the corn and the fertility of the land. Perhaps the most potent theory, however, is that the were-jaguar is not a specific god, but rather a representation of a spiritual state of being, the shamanic transformation. The jaguar, with its incredible strength, its nocturnal vision, and its ability to move silently through the forest and navigate the dark underworld of caves, was the ultimate spirit animal, the most powerful ally a shaman ruler could hope to have. The were-jaguar motif, with its blend of human and feline features, may capture the very moment of metamorphosis, the dangerous and painful process of the ruler shedding his human form to become one with his jaguar spirit familiar. He is neither fully human nor fully animal, but something in between, a being capable of crossing the threshold between the natural and supernatural worlds. The art, in this sense, becomes a depiction of a ritual process, a glimpse into the ecstatic trance at the very heart of Olmec power. These varied interpretations don't necessarily contradict each other. The were-jaguar was likely all of these things at once, a complex symbol of divine power that encompassed the rain, the corn, and the transformative authority of the king. This grand cosmic architecture was not an empty stage. It was teeming with powerful, often terrifying, supernatural inhabitants. And among the pantheon of strange, hybrid beings that populated the Olmec spiritual world, one figure reigned supreme. It was an entity so central to their beliefs, so pervasive in their art, that it seems to touch upon every aspect of their culture, from kingship and fertility to shamanism and the very origins of their people. We call this enigmatic being the were-jaguar. The name is a bit of a clumsy modern convenience, conjuring images of a simple half-man, half-cat from a monster movie. But the Olmec reality was far more complex, far more nuanced, and infinitely stranger. This was no mere monster. This was the face of the divine. To find the were-jaguar, one has only to look at almost any piece of Olmec art, from the monumental to the miniature. It stares back at us from colossal thrones, from polished jade chelts, from ceramic vessels, and from rock carvings hidden deep in sacred caves. The features are unmistakable, a consistent set of motifs that define this supernatural entity. The most prominent is the mouth, a distinct, downturned snarl with thick, fleshy lips pulled back to reveal toothless gums, or occasionally a pair of sharp fangs at the corners. It's often called a trapezoidal mouth, and it is the were-jaguar's most definitive signature. The eyes are typically almond-shaped and slanted, often with a trough-like groove running through them, and most curiously, the head is almost always marked with a deep, V-shaped cleft at the very top, as if the skull itself were indented or sprouting. Often, this powerful, snarling face is attached to the body of a plump, sexless infant. We see these were-jaguar babies everywhere, their faces contorted in a divine rage or a supernatural cry. They are often depicted as limp and powerless, being cradled in the arms of a stoic, seated adult figure, almost always an Olmec ruler. This juxtaposition of a powerful divine being in the helpless form of a baby is one of the most profound and puzzling aspects of their iconography. It's a riddle carved in stone and jade, and for decades, archaeologists have been trying to decipher its meaning. What then was the were-jaguar. The truth is, we don't know for certain, but there are several compelling theories that each shade a different light on the mystery. One hypothesis is that the were-jaguar, particularly in its infant form, was a powerful rain deity. The snarling, crying face of the baby is seen as a representation of a thunderclap and the subsequent downpour of life-giving and sometimes destructive rain. In a world utterly dependent on agriculture, a god that controlled the rain would have been of paramount importance. The jaguar, remember, was the most powerful creature of the earthly realm, and its deep, guttural roar echoing through the jungle canopy could easily have been associated with the rumble of distant thunder, making it a natural avatar for a storm god. Another interpretation links the were-jaguar directly to the cultivation of maize. In this view, that mysterious cleft in the creature's head is not a wound or a deformity, but a symbol of a sprouting corn kernel, the indentation from which the first green shoot emerges. The were-jaguar, then, becomes a personification of the spirit of maize, the foundational crop that sustained Olmec society. A ruler holding a were-jaguar infant would be making a powerful statement, declaring his sacred ability to guarantee the growth of the corn and the fertility of the land. Perhaps the most potent theory, however, is that the were-jaguar is not a specific god, but rather a representation of a spiritual state of being, the shamanic transformation. The jaguar, with its incredible strength, its nocturnal vision, and its ability to move silently through the forest and navigate the dark underworld of caves, was the ultimate spirit animal, the most powerful ally a shaman ruler could hope to have. The were-jaguar motif, with its blend of human and feline features, may capture the very moment of metamorphosis, the dangerous and painful process of the ruler shedding his human form to become one with his jaguar spirit familiar. He is neither fully human nor fully animal, but something in between, a being capable of crossing the threshold between the natural and supernatural worlds. The art, in this sense, becomes a depiction of a ritual process, a glimpse into the ecstatic trance at the very heart of Olmec power. These varied interpretations don't necessarily contradict each other. The were-jaguar was likely all of these things at once, a complex symbol of divine power that encompassed the rain, the corn, and the transformative authority of the king. These powerful rituals of ballgame and bloodletting were the very bedrock of a ruler's authority, the public performances that held the Olmec social pyramid together. For 3 centuries, the shaman lords of San Lorenzo had successfully played their part, and their city had flourished as the undisputed center of their world. But around the year 900 BCE, the rituals began to fail. The cosmic balance, which the rulers were tasked with maintaining, tipped into chaos. The faith that had moved mountains of earth and stone seemingly evaporated, and the most sacred objects in their universe were subjected to a wave of deliberate, methodical, and shocking destruction. The golden age of San Lorenzo was about to come to a violent and mysterious end. What happened at San Lorenzo was not the slow, quiet fading of a city into irrelevance. It was a dramatic and seemingly sudden event. Across the Great Plateau, the sacred monuments that had defined the city's power were attacked. Archaeologists digging into the earth of San Lorenzo have found a scene of extraordinary carnage. The colossal heads, those serene and intimidating portraits of the city's dynastic founders were toppled from their pedestals. Their faces were intentionally battered, their noses smashed, great chips gouged from their cheeks and helmets. The massive tabletop thrones were broken into fragments. Stelae and statues were decapitated and shattered. And then, most curiously of all, these mutilated sculptures were not left scattered where they fell. They were gathered up and dragged to long trench-like pits that had been prepared nearby. There, they were arranged in careful lines, like bodies in a mass grave, and respectfully, intentionally buried. The entire city, it seems, was ritually killed and interred. Who did this and why is the great unanswered question of the early Olmec period. For years, the simplest explanation was the most popular, an invasion. Scholars imagined a rival Olmec center, perhaps the burgeoning city of Venta, leading an army against San Lorenzo. In this scenario, the destruction of the monuments was the final, triumphant act of a conquering foe, a way to humiliate the defeated dynasty and erase its legacy from the landscape. But as more evidence has emerged, this theory has begun to seem less and less likely. An invading army, flush with victory, is typically interested in plunder and chaotic destruction. They are not known for undertaking the immense, organized labor of carefully burying the monuments of their enemies. Furthermore, there is a conspicuous lack of other evidence for warfare. No layers of ash from burned temples, no arrowheads lodged in palace walls, no signs of a desperate last stand. This has led to a second, more compelling theory, an internal rebellion. Imagine a series of droughts or devastating floods that lead to crop failure and famine. The common people, whose labor and tribute supported the entire system, begin to starve. They look to their shaman lord, the man whose entire purpose is to guarantee the favor of the gods, and they see that he has failed. The cosmic contract has been broken. In their desperation and anger, they rise up, overwhelming the elite. They turn their fury on the most potent symbols of the power that had oppressed them, the stone faces of their failed rulers. In this light, the smashing of the monuments becomes a revolutionary act, an attempt to kill the very spirit of the dynasty. The careful burial that followed could have been a way to neutralize the dangerous, supernatural energy believed to reside within these objects, ensuring that the ghosts of the old kings could never return to power. Yet there is a third possibility, one that is perhaps the most unsettling and yet the most consistent with the Olmec worldview we have explored. What if the destruction was not an act of rage, but of reverence? What if the monuments were destroyed by the rulers and people of San Lorenzo themselves? In their cyclical view of time and power, it's possible that a dynasty or an entire era had a natural lifespan. When that cycle came to its end, perhaps signaled by a series of terrible omens or the death of a great ruler, the city's sacred power was believed to be exhausted. To simply abandon the monuments would be to leave these supernaturally charged objects active but untended, a dangerous source of cosmic instability. The only safe course of action was to ritually decommission them. Toppling the head of a ruler was a way to end his reign. Smashing its face was a way to release his spirit from its stone vessel. And the final burial was a respectful interment, putting the now inert but still sacred objects to rest. It was not a murder, but a funeral. The entire violent episode might have been the Olmec way of turning the page of history, a final, massive ceremony to close one chapter of their world before the next could begin. After this great cataclysm, whether by invasion, rebellion, or ritual death, San Lorenzo was largely abandoned, its population scattered, its power gone forever, leaving a void in the heartland waiting to be filled. The fall of San Lorenzo left a gaping hole in the fabric of the Olmec world. For 3 centuries, it had been the gravitational center, the place where all lines of power, tribute, and faith converged. Its sudden and violent demise created a power vacuum, a period of uncertainty and realignment. It must have been a deeply unsettling time, an era where the old certainties had been literally smashed and buried. But the Olmec culture was far too resilient and deeply rooted to simply vanish with its first great capital. The ideological and social structures that had been pioneered at San Lorenzo were not forgotten. They were simply transplanted, ready to bloom again in new, more fertile ground. As the memory of San Lorenzo's glory faded into the past, a new power began to rise in the east. A city that would take the Olmec experiment to its most refined and extravagant heights. This was the dawn of Venta. Venta was not born from the ashes of the old world. It rose from the water. Its location tells a story of a profound shift in thinking. While San Lorenzo was built on a defensible inland ridge, Venta was established on a small, lonely island in the heart of a vast coastal swamp, just a few miles from the Gulf of Mexico. It was a place surrounded not by dry land, but by a tangled, labyrinthine world of mangrove thickets, brackish estuaries, and the slow, meandering coils of the Tonala River. The air here was thick with the scent of salt and decay, the constant hum of mosquitoes, and the cries of seabirds. It was, to our modern eyes, a deeply inhospitable place to build a great city, a constant battle against flooding, insects, and the encroaching swamp. And yet, for the Olmec of the Middle Formative Period, from roughly 900 to 400 BCE, this strange, watery island became the new center of the universe, their grandest and most sacred capital. It had been a minor village during San Lorenzo's reign, but after the old capital's collapse, Venta began a period of explosive growth. People, power, and prestige shifted eastward. This was not a simple change of address. It was a renaissance, a rebirth of the Olmec identity. They carried with them the foundational tenets of their culture, the belief in divine shaman lords, the mastery of stone carving, the 3-tiered cosmology, and the reverence for the were-jaguar. 4 of their own colossal heads, portraits of their new dynasty of rulers, have been found at Venta. They continued to undertake the arduous task of quarrying basalt in the Tuxtla Mountains and rafting it now even further, a journey of well over 100 kilometers to their swampy island home. The old symbols of power were still the most potent, but the rulers of Venta were not mere imitators. They were innovators who refined and elaborated upon the traditions they inherited. The art of Venta, while clearly Olmec, has a different feel to it. The austere, almost blocky power of San Lorenzo's sculptures gives way to a greater naturalism, a subtlety of expression, and a more graceful and complex composition. More profoundly, the rulers of Venta seem to have doubled down on the importance of ritual and ceremonialism. The city became a vast stage for the most elaborate offerings and architectural programs yet seen in Mesoamerica, a place where precious exotic materials were consumed on an epic scale, not for worldly adornment, but as food for the gods. This raises the same question that hangs over San Lorenzo's fall. Why the shift? Why was a thriving, established capital abandoned in favor of a remote, difficult, swampy island? One theory lies in the earth itself. The rivers of the heartland were notoriously fickle, constantly changing their course. It's possible that the Coatzacoalcos river system that sustained San Lorenzo began to silt up or shift its main channel, crippling the city's agriculture and its vital transport routes. The Tonalá River system, which flowed past La Venta, may have simply become the more reliable and productive waterway. Another possibility is that La Venta's rulers shrewdly positioned themselves to control a different kind of resource, the lucrative, long-distance trade routes. From their coastal island, they could dominate canoe-based trade along the Gulf, controlling the flow of exotic raw materials like obsidian from the highlands and precious greenstones like jade and serpentine from the south. As these materials became more and more central to Olmec ritual life, controlling their supply would have been a source of immense economic and political power. Or perhaps the reason was not practical, but purely spiritual. The violent end of San Lorenzo may have been interpreted as a sign that the site itself had lost its sacred power, its connection to the cosmos severed. A new capital was needed, a new axis mundi. The island setting of La Venta, rising from the water, like the primordial mound of creation in their own myths, may have been seen as a place of immense sacred potential, a blank slate upon which a more perfect model of the cosmos could be built, a place to begin again. Imagine a traveler paddling through that bewildering maze of waterways, lost in a world of green leaves and brown water. Then suddenly, through a break in the trees, they would see it, a colossal, man-made mountain of earth rising over 100 feet into the sky, a perfectly symmetrical cone piercing the flat horizon. This was the Great Pyramid of La Venta, a beacon of faith, a statement of power, and the heart of the new Olmec world. That great earthen pyramid was the first and most emphatic statement of La Venta's power, a declaration of faith and ambition visible for miles across the flat, watery landscape. But it was only the beginning. To step off the canoe and onto the sacred island of La Venta was to enter a world that had been sculpted by an unwavering and profoundly ordered vision. Unlike San Lorenzo, which had a more organic, sprawling layout, the new capital was a masterpiece of ceremonial design, a city built not just to house people, but to serve as a literal model of the Olmec cosmos. It was a place where every pyramid, every plaza, every buried offering was a single, carefully chosen word in a grand architectural prayer. The most stunning feature of La Venta's design is its rigid adherence to a central axis. Imagine a single, invisible line drawn through the heart of the island. Every significant structure in the city's 2-mile-long ceremonial core was arranged in perfect, bilateral symmetry along this line. It was a city of mirror images, a place of profound and intentional balance. And this line was not oriented to the cardinal directions as we know them. Instead, for reasons that remain one of the great puzzles of Olmec archaeology, the entire city was aligned 8 degrees west of true north. This was no accident. no builder's miscalculation. It was a deliberate choice, a sacred orientation that must have held a deep cosmological significance, perhaps aligning the city with the rising of a particular star, or pointing to a distant, sacred mountain. To walk this central axis was to walk the path of the cosmos, to move through a landscape that was a physical manifestation of their spiritual beliefs. Let us take that walk. Our journey begins at the southern end, in the vast public spaces of the city. Here, in a great sunken plaza, the common people would have gathered for the grand public ceremonies. This is where the colossal heads of the city's rulers were displayed, their giant stone faces gazing out at the populace, a constant and intimidating reminder of the dynasty's power. Here, too, were the great rectangular thrones, those blocks of basalt with niches from which the ruler would emerge, as if from the mouth of the underworld itself, to perform the rituals that sustained his kingdom. This was the public face of La Venta, the grand stage where the power of the elite was put on display for all to see. As we proceed north along the axis, we come to the foot of the city's great mountain, the pyramid known as Complex C. This was the largest structure in Mesoamerica for centuries, 100-foot tall cone of packed earth and clay, hauled basket by basket from the surrounding swamps. Unlike the smooth, stepped pyramids of the later Maya or Aztecs, the Great Pyramid of La Venta was strangely shaped, with 10 deep ridges and valleys running down its sides, giving it the appearance of a fluted volcano, perhaps a deliberate imitation of the volcanic cones of the Tuxtla Mountains, from which their sacred stone was quarried. This was the city's ultimate axis mundi, a man-made mountain connecting the earthly plane to the celestial realm above and the watery underworld below. No one knows what temple might have once stood on its summit, but from its peak, the ruler could look down upon his entire cosmic domain. But the true heart of La Venta's sacredness lay just north of the pyramid, in a highly restricted area known as Complex A. This was not a place for the public. It was a holy of holies, a sacred courtyard enclosed by a fence of more than 500 massive 2-ton basalt columns, each one set upright like a colossal stone stake. Within this forbidden precinct, the most potent and secret rituals were performed. Here, archaeologists have found the city's most elaborate tombs, including one constructed like a log cabin out of the same basalt columns, containing the remains of 2 young nobles, their bodies covered in a shroud of jade beads and ornaments, a testament to their high status and the Olmec belief in an afterlife. And it was here, deep beneath the colored clay floors of the courtyard, that the rulers of La Venta made their most extravagant offerings to the earth, the massive buried mosaics. In this space, the Olmec worldview of immense unseen effort for the benefit of the gods reached its zenith, a place where their most precious works of art and tons of their most sacred materials were offered up and then immediately hidden, meant only for the eyes of the chthonic deities who dwelled in the darkness below. Within the sacred column-lined walls of La Venta's Complex A, the Olmec made their most profound statements of faith. The sheer scale of the offerings, the tons of serpentine, the elaborate tombs, speaks to a civilization at the peak of its power and devotion. But as we look closer at these buried treasures, a very specific and intentional pattern emerges. The basalt columns were black, the floors were made of colored clays, But the most precious offerings, the materials chosen as the ultimate gift for the gods, were almost always a particular shade of green. This was not a choice based on rarity alone. For the Olmec, the color green was the color of life itself, and the stones that held this color, particularly jade and serpentine, were the most sacred and potent substances in their universe, far more valuable than the gold that glittered in their rivers. When we speak of Olmec greenstone, we are talking about a category of materials defined by this sacred hue. The most common was serpentine, a relatively soft, waxy-feeling stone with a beautiful mottled green appearance. It was this material, quarried and imported from many miles away, that they used to create the thousands of blocks for their buried mosaics. But the true prize, the pinnacle of all materials, was jadeite. Known to us simply as jade, this was a substance of incredible beauty and even more incredible difficulty. It is a gemstone of exceptional hardness, tougher than steel, with a deep, translucent, watery green color that seems to glow from within. To the Olmec, a piece of polished jade was not just a rock. It was a concentrated piece of the cosmos, a vessel for the divine essence of life. The symbolism was drawn directly from the world around them. In their riverine home, green was the color of the still deep waters of the swamps and estuaries, the primordial ocean from which they believed the world was born. More importantly, green was the color of the young tender shoot of maize, the first sign of life emerging from the dark earth after a planting. The maize plant was their sustenance, their child, the very foundation of their existence. Therefore, the color green became inextricably linked with agricultural fertility, with new growth, with vitality, and with the promise of rebirth. A ruler adorned in jade was not just showing off his wealth, he was draping himself in the very concept of life and abundance, presenting himself as the guarantor of the harvest. A jade bead placed in the mouth of the deceased was a promise of a new life, a seed of vitality planted in the underworld. What makes their reverence for jade even more astonishing is the sheer effort required to obtain and work it. There are no sources of true jadeite anywhere in or near the Olmec heartland. The only major source in all of ancient Mesoamerica is the Motagua River Valley in modern-day Guatemala, a territory hundreds of miles to the south, separated from La Venta by dense jungles, high mountains, and hostile territories. The Olmec had to mount massive, long-distance trade expeditions or maintain a complex network of alliances just to acquire the raw, uncut boulders of this precious stone. The journey of a single jade boulder back to the capital was an epic undertaking. Once it arrived, the true artistry began. Because of its hardness, jade cannot be carved in the traditional sense. Olmec lapidaries, with endless patience, had to use a process of slow abrasion. They would use harder stones to peck and grind at the surface, and employ drills made of reed or bone, spun rapidly with a mixture of sand and water, to bore the fine, precise holes for stringing beads or creating intricate cutout designs. To create one of the small, elegant figurines or polished axe heads known as celts, a master artisan might have had to work for months, even years, slowly wearing the stone away to reveal the form hidden within. This immense investment of time and skill only added to the object's sacred power, and it is in the treatment of these finished objects that we see the Olmec mind at its most mysterious. In the sacred precinct of Venta, archaeologists have found caches of dozens of these beautiful, polished jade and serpentine celts, objects that took untold hours to create, that were not tools but ritual objects, many incised with the snarling face of the were-jaguar. They were not placed in tombs or worn as adornments. Instead, they were arranged in precise symbolic patterns, sometimes forming a cross, with each arm pointing to a sacred direction. And then, like the mosaics, they were intentionally buried as an offering to the earth. Why? The most compelling hypothesis is that these celts, shaped like the tools used to clear the forest for planting, were seen as symbolic seeds of fertility. By planting them in the heart of their sacred city, the Olmec were performing a kind of cosmic agriculture, a ritual designed to charge the earth with life-giving energy and ensure the prosperity of the maize fields that fed their kingdom. This immense effort to imbue their world with meaning by sculpting the land, by burying precious greenstone, by performing potent rituals, all points to a society that was deeply engaged in symbolic communication. The Olmec world was saturated with meaning, a landscape where every carved line on a ruler's throne and every polished jade celt held a specific and important message. This naturally leads to one of the most compelling and frustrating questions in all of Mesoamerican history. Did the Olmecs have a system of writing? Did they take that final, crucial step from a rich iconography to a true, codified script, a way to record their history, their beliefs, and the names of their kings in permanent form? The answer, like so much about the Olmecs, is a tantalizing whisper rather than a clear statement. Unlike the later Maya, who famously covered their temples and pottery with beautiful and complex hieroglyphic texts, the Olmec heartland has yielded precious little that scholars can definitively label as writing. This absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. It is entirely possible, even probable, that the Olmecs, like their cultural descendants, wrote primarily on perishable materials. Imagine a royal library at Venta, filled not with stone tablets, but with codices, long screen-fold books made of bark paper or cured deerskin. Imagine scribes using brushes made from animal hair to paint delicate glyphs, recording royal genealogies, astronomical observations, and sacred prophecies. Such a library would have been a priceless treasure of ancient knowledge, but in the relentlessly hot and humid climate of the Gulf Coast, it would have stood no chance of survival. Over 3,000 years, the dampness and the insects would have consumed every last page, leaving us with nothing but silence. What we do have are tantalizing hints, scattered clues in their durable art that suggest a highly sophisticated system of symbolic communication that bordered on true writing. Olmec art is not just decorative, it is meant to be read. The elaborate headdresses worn by the rulers on the colossal heads and stelae are not random assortments of feathers and symbols. They are complex assemblages, functioning almost like heraldic crests, their specific elements likely communicating the ruler's personal name, his lineage, and his patron deities. Certain abstract symbols appear again and again in association with particular figures, acting almost like name tags or titles. The famous stone monument from Las Limas, which shows a seated ruler holding a were-jaguar baby, is covered in smaller, incised drawings on the ruler's shoulders and knees. These are not idle doodles. They are clearly symbolic statements meant to identify the figures and add another layer of narrative to the scene. This was a system of communication on the verge of becoming a script. And then, in the late 1990s, a discovery was made that threw the entire debate into a new and exciting light. In a gravel quarry in the old heartland, not far from the ruins of San Lorenzo, road builders unearthed a rectangular slab of serpentine stone about the size of a modern legal pad. It has become known as the Cascajal block, and it is either the Rosetta Stone of a lost Olmec script or one of the most elaborate and confounding fakes in archaeological history. The block is inscribed with 62 distinct signs, or glyphs. Some are recognizable images from the wider world of Olmec art: an insect, a corn cob, a ceremonial perforator, a throne. But many more are purely abstract shapes, a lexicon of unknown symbols. What makes the Cascajal block so electrifying is that these signs are not arranged randomly. They are organized into neat, horizontal rows, just like the words in this sentence. There are clear patterns of repetition and sequence, suggesting a text with a genuine grammatical and syntactic structure. If it is authentic, and if the dating to around 900 BCE is correct, it is, by a margin of centuries, the oldest example of writing ever found in the Americas. It is a single, stunning page from that lost library we can only dream of. But the block is also deeply problematic. It is a complete anomaly, a total orphan. No other object bearing this script has ever been found, and its discovery in a gravel pit, not in a sealed and stratified archaeological excavation, makes its age and its authenticity infuriatingly difficult to prove beyond all doubt. Is it the key to a forgotten language, or is it a riddle without an answer? For now, it remains a whisper, a suggestion that the Olmecs not only carved their world into a shape of their liking, but that they may have also captured its essence in a stream of elegant, silent glyphs, a language whose voice was lost to the humidity in the jungle long ago. That enigmatic script on the Cascajal block remains a frustratingly silent witness. But even if the Olmec's full literary voice is lost to us, they left behind the clear echoes of another, equally profound system of symbolic thought. This was a language not of words, but of numbers, a script not for recording speech, but for recording the steady, inexorable passage of time itself. To gaze out from a temple top at La Venta was to see a universe of cycles, the daily journey of the sun, the monthly phases of the moon, the annual return of the rains, and the sprouting of the maize. For a society so obsessed with order and cosmic balance, it was not enough to simply observe these cycles. They had to be understood, predicted, and recorded. In their quest to do so, the Olmecs became the architects of time, inventing the sophisticated and complex calendar systems that would form the intellectual bedrock of every great civilization that followed in their wake. The system they developed, and which was perfected by the later Maya, was a beautifully intricate piece of intellectual machinery comprised of several interlocking gears. The first was a 260-day ritual calendar, a sacred almanac that was the heartbeat of their ceremonial life. It was formed by the combinations of 20 distinct day names, days like jaguar, water, and flower, with a cycle of 13 numbers. Each day had its own unique combination of name and number, and this 260-day cycle, whose origin remains a mystery, was used for divination, for scheduling religious festivals, and for determining the fates and personalities of newborn children. Running parallel to this was a second, more familiar calendar, a 365-day solar year. This calendar was a practical tool for the farmer, tracking the seasons with remarkable accuracy. It was composed of 18 months, each with 20 days, followed by a tense and dangerous 5-day period at the end of the year, a time outside of the normal calendar when the portals to the supernatural world were believed to be wide open. These two calendars, the sacred and the secular, ran simultaneously. A specific date would have a name in both systems, and because of their different lengths, the combined cycle would not repeat for 52 years. This 52-year period, known as the calendar round, was a major milestone, a moment of profound anxiety and celebration, a time to extinguish old fires and light new ones, marking the renewal of the world for another generation. But even this grand cycle had a limitation. It was, by its nature, repetitive. It was excellent for marking the seasons and ritual cycles, but it was not a system for recording unique, linear history. For that, the Olmecs, or their immediate cultural heirs, the Olmec, made their most revolutionary intellectual leap, the invention of the long count. The long count was a system for fixing any given day within a vast, unfolding timeline that began at a mythical creation date in what corresponds to our year 3114 BCE. Using a sophisticated mathematical system based on the number 20, they could count the total number of days that had elapsed since that primordial starting point. To do this, they required one of the most significant inventions in human history, the concept of zero. In their positional notation system, where the value of a digit depends on its place in a sequence, a placeholder for an empty set is essential. The Olmecs created this placeholder, a concept that would not arise in India for many more centuries, giving them the ability to perform complex calculations and record vast spans of time with perfect accuracy. The oldest surviving date in this system, carved on a monument from the late Olmec site of Tres Zapotes, records a day in 31 BCE, but the calendar's sheer complexity implies it had been in development for a very long time before that, almost certainly within the sacred precincts of Venta. This great, ever-advancing timeline allowed them to anchor the lives of their rulers and the events of their kingdom to a single, continuous, and epic historical narrative, transforming time from a repeating circle into a grand, straight line. That enigmatic script on the Cascagel block remains a frustratingly silent witness. But even if the Olmec's full literary voice is lost to us, they left behind the clear echoes of another, equally profound system of symbolic thought. This was a language not of words but of numbers, a script not for recording speech, but for recording the steady, inexorable passage of time itself. To gaze out from a temple top at Venta was to see a universe of cycles, the daily journey of the sun, the monthly phases of the moon, the annual return of the rains, and the sprouting of the maize. For a society so obsessed with order and cosmic balance, it was not enough to simply observe these cycles. They had to be understood, predicted, and recorded. In their quest to do so, the Olmecs became the architects of time, inventing the sophisticated and complex calendar systems that would form the intellectual bedrock of every great civilization that followed in their wake. The system they developed, and which was perfected by the later Maya, was a beautifully intricate piece of intellectual machinery, comprised of several interlocking gears. The first was a 260-day ritual calendar, a sacred almanac that was the heartbeat of their ceremonial life. It was formed by the combination of 20 distinct day names, days like jaguar, water, and flower, with a cycle of 13 numbers. Each day had its own unique combination of name and number, and this 260-day cycle, whose origin remains a mystery, was used for divination, for scheduling religious festivals, and for determining the fates and personalities of newborn children. Running parallel to this was a second, more familiar calendar, a 365-day solar year. This calendar was a practical tool for the farmer, tracking the seasons with remarkable accuracy. It was composed of 18 months, each with 20 days, followed by a tense and dangerous 5-day period at the end of the year, a time outside of the normal calendar when the portals to the supernatural world were believed to be wide open. These two calendars, the sacred and the secular, ran simultaneously. A specific date would have a name in both systems, and because of their different lengths, the combined cycle would not repeat for 52 years. This 52-year period, known as the calendar round, was a major milestone, a moment of profound anxiety and celebration, a time to extinguish old fires and light new ones, marking the renewal of the world for another generation. But even this grand cycle had a limitation. It was, by its nature, repetitive. It was excellent for marking the seasons and ritual cycles, but it was not a system for recording unique, linear history. For that, the Olmecs, or their immediate cultural heirs, the Epa Olmec, made their most revolutionary intellectual leap: the invention of the long count. The long count was a system for fixing any given day within a vast, unfolding timeline that began at a mythical creation date in what corresponds to our year 3114 BCE. Using a sophisticated mathematical system based on the number 20, they could count the total number of days that had elapsed since that primordial starting point. To do this, they required one of the most significant inventions in human history, the concept of zero. In their positional notation system, where the value of a digit depends on its place in a sequence, a placeholder for an empty set is essential. The Olmecs created this placeholder, a concept that would not arise in India for many more centuries, giving them the ability to perform complex calculations and record vast spans of time with perfect accuracy. The oldest surviving date in this system, carved on a monument from the late Olmec site of Tres Zapotes, records a day in 31 BCE, but the calendar's sheer complexity implies it had been in development for a very long time before that, almost certainly within the sacred precincts of Venta. This great, ever-advancing timeline allowed them to anchor the lives of their rulers and the events of their kingdom to a single, continuous, and epic historical narrative, transforming time from a repeating circle into a grand, straight line. This great web of exchange, which carried Olmec ideas and art to the misty highlands of central Mexico and the dry valleys of Oaxaca, has led to one of the longest, most passionate, and most fundamental debates in the study of ancient America. It is a question that gets to the very heart of the Olmec identity and their place in history. As we watch their influence spread, as we see their snarling or jaguar motif appear on the pottery of distant peoples, we are forced to ask, were the Olmecs the singular mother culture of Mesoamerica? Was this civilization a unique and solitary genesis, a single brilliant sun from which all the planets of later cultures, like the Maya and the Aztec, took their light? Or was the reality something more complex, a sky filled with a whole constellation of rising stars? For many years, the mother culture theory was the undisputed truth. The pioneering archaeologists who first hacked their way through the jungle to reveal the wonders of La Venta and San Lorenzo were struck by two things: the incredible sophistication of Olmec culture and its profound antiquity. The great Olmec centers flourished a full 1,000 years before the classic Maya cities like Tikal or Palenque reached their peak. The evidence seemed clear. The Olmecs were first. They were the ones who, in the isolation of their swampy heartland, invented all the hallmark traits of Mesoamerican civilization: the concept of divine kingship, the construction of pyramids, the sacred ball game, the complex calendar, and a powerful foundational art style. In this view, all the other early cultures of Mesoamerica were essentially passive recipients of this brilliant Olmec inheritance. They were the students, and the Olmecs were the great teachers. The relationship was a parental one, a single source of innovation that then diffused outwards, seeding the entire cultural landscape. It is a simple, powerful, and elegant idea, and for a long time, the evidence seemed to support it. But as archaeological work has expanded beyond the Gulf Coast heartland, a different, more nuanced picture has begun to emerge. In places like the Valley of Oaxaca, at the ancient Zapotec capital of San Jose Mogote, or in the Basin of Mexico, at villages like Tlatilco, archaeologists have found evidence of complex societies developing right alongside the Olmecs, and in some cases, even slightly before them. These cultures were building their own public and ceremonial architecture, developing their own unique pottery styles, and creating their own systems of symbolic communication. They were not blank slates waiting for Olmec influence to arrive. This has given rise to the sister cultures hypothesis. This theory argues that the Olmecs were not a solitary mother, but perhaps the oldest and most influential of a whole family of sibling cultures that were all growing up together across Mesoamerica. In this model, the first millennium BCE was a period of intense interaction and mutual influence between several increasingly complex societies. The Olmecs of the Gulf Coast, the early Zapotecs of Oaxaca, the people of the Basin of Mexico, they were all in communication, all participating in that great trade network we just explored. They were exchanging goods, ideas, and technologies. An Olmec trader visiting a village in the highlands might bring with him a new religious concept, but he might also return home with a new technique for making mirrors or a new astronomical observation. In this view, the Olmecs did not invent Mesoamerican civilization in a vacuum. Rather, they were key participants, perhaps even the leaders for a time, in a multicultural conversation that created it collectively. So which is it? The single great mother tree or the diverse forest of sisters? The truth, as it so often does, likely lies somewhere in the fertile ground between the two extremes. There is no denying the profound and foundational influence of the Olmecs. They were the first to create a state-level society, the first to move multi-ton stones for their monuments, and their art style was, for a time, the undeniable international prestige language of power and authority across the region. They were, at the very least, a first among equals. But it is equally clear that the other cultures of Mesoamerica were not just empty vessels. They were active agents in their own history, selecting which Olmec ideas they wanted to adopt, adapting them to their own local traditions, and contributing their own unique innovations to the great, bubbling pot of emerging Mesoamerican civilization. The Olmecs may have written the opening chapter, but the story of Mesoamerica was one that many different peoples would continue to write together. That great debate, whether the Olmecs were a single mother or one of several sisters, is a conversation held in the cool, quiet halls of academia. But the story of their influence was not written in academic papers. It was etched in stone, painted on pottery, and carved in precious jade. While the colossal heads are the most thunderous and undeniable statement of Olmec power, their cultural DNA was also carried in smaller, more portable, and often far more intimate works of art. To truly appreciate the Olmecs, we must sometimes look away from the monuments that were meant to intimidate and overwhelm, and look instead at the masterpieces that were meant to be held in the hand or hidden in the deepest recesses of a sacred cave. The Olmecs were, without question, the most gifted lapidary artists of ancient America. Their ability to work with the hardest and most unforgiving of stones, particularly jadeite, remains a source of wonder. From this precious greenstone, they crafted small, serene figurines, typically depicting standing male figures with unnaturally elongated heads, a sign that the Olmec elite practiced cranial deformation from infancy, binding the skull to create a distinctive, high arch that was a mark of nobility. These figures often have the classic Olmec facial features, the fleshy, downturned mouth, the slanted eyes, and a powerful, athletic build, yet they convey an incredible sense of poise and tranquility. They are not portraits of specific rulers in the way the colossal heads are. They are idealized images of Olmec nobility, the perfect embodiment of their aesthetic and spiritual ideals. Equally masterful were the ceremonial celts, those polished, axe-head-shaped objects we have seen buried in the foundations of La Venta. While many were left plain to showcase the beauty of the stone, others were used as a canvas for the most intricate and complex incised designs. Using fine, sharp tools, the artists would etch the snarling faces of their gods, the geometric patterns of their cosmos, and the symbolic regalia of their kings onto the polished green surfaces. These were not just beautiful objects. They were tablets of sacred knowledge, their abstract designs forming a kind of visual prayer. And then there were the masks, carved from jade or serpentine. They are hauntingly beautiful, with hollowed-out eyes and a calm, otherworldly expression. They were likely not death masks for the dead, but transformation masks for the living, worn by a shaman ruler during a ritual to help him shed his human skin and become the god whose face he now wore. Beyond the world of greenstone, their artists excelled in ceramics, creating unique and powerful forms. Most famous among these are the so-called hollow babies, curious and slightly unsettling ceramic figurines of plump, seated infants. Their bodies are rendered with a startling naturalism, but their faces often bear the classic war-jaguar snarl. They are covered in a highly polished white or cream-colored slip, giving them a smooth, almost porcelain-like quality. Their exact purpose is unknown. Were they images of infant deities, effigies used in fertility rituals, or something else entirely? They remain one of the most distinctive and mysterious forms of Olmec portable art. But perhaps the most surprising and dramatic examples of Olmec art are found hundreds of miles to the west of the heartland, far from the swamps and rivers, in the dry, mountainous region of modern-day Guerrero. Here, deep inside limestone caves, the Olmecs or their disciples left behind a series of stunning paintings. In the profound darkness and silence of Juxtlahuaca Cave, more than a kilometer from any natural light, they painted one of the earliest and most complex narrative scenes in Mesoamerican art. On a smooth stalagmite, a tall, imposing figure, clearly a ruler, stands dominant. He is dressed in an elaborate headdress, a jaguar pelt, and striped leggings, and in one hand he holds a strange serpentine object, while with the other he holds a rope attached to a much smaller, kneeling captive. Not far away, in another cave called Oxtotitlan, a different painting shows a ruler dressed in a magnificent bird monster costume, complete with owl-like goggles and great green wings, seated upon a throne identical to the great stone altars of the heartland. The existence of these paintings, so far from home, raises a profound question. Were these caves sacred pilgrimage sites, places of such immense spiritual power that Olmec rulers from Venta would make the long and dangerous journey to perform rituals in the earth's deepest womb and leave their mark? Or were these paintings commissioned by powerful local chieftains who had so thoroughly adopted the ideology of Olmec kingship that they depicted themselves in the full, authentic style of the Gulf Coast masters? Either way, these hidden masterpieces tell us that the power of Olmec art and belief was not confined to their great cities, but was a force strong enough to penetrate the deepest caves and the farthest corners of their known world. The Olmec artistic tradition, whether carved into a handheld piece of jade or painted onto the wall of a distant cave, was a testament to a culture at the zenith of its confidence and influence. For 500 years, the city of Venta had been the unwavering center of that tradition, a sacred island from which a powerful and coherent vision of the cosmos was broadcast across their world. But no golden age lasts forever. Sometime around 400 BCE, the same mysterious fate that had befallen San Lorenzo half a millennium earlier finally came for Venta. Its sacred monuments were ritually mutilated, its beautiful offerings were desecrated, and its great earthen pyramid was left to the encroaching swamp. The heart of the Olmec world stopped beating, and a long twilight began to fall across the heartland. As the light of Venta was extinguished, a different kind of center rose to prominence, not as a direct inheritor of Venta's immense spiritual authority, but more as a survivor, a keeper of the fading embers of the once great Olmec flame. This was the city of Tres Zapotes, located to the west of the other two great capitals, nestled in the rolling foothills of the Tuxtla Mountains. Tres Zapotes had been a quiet witness to the entire arc of Olmec history. It was founded even before San Lorenzo's rise, and had existed as a secondary center throughout the long centuries of San Lorenzo's and then Venta's dominance. It was only after Venta's collapse that Tres Zapotes, almost by default, became the most important settlement remaining in the old Olmec heartland. But this was not a restoration of the old empire. Tres Zapotes was a different kind of place, a city that reflected a changed world. Its layout lacked the rigid, cosmic symmetry of Venta. Instead of a single, monumental ceremonial core, it was a sprawling collection of over 160 mounds spread out over several square miles, suggesting a more decentralized, perhaps less autocratic, form of government. The sheer obsessive scale of the labor projects of the past was gone. There were no more buried mosaics made of 1,000 tons of imported stone, no more colossal earth-moving projects to reshape the very land. The age of that kind of absolute, faith-driven power seemed to have passed. And yet, the traditions were not entirely forgotten. The rulers of Tres Zapotes still clung to the ancient symbols of power. 2 colossal heads have been found at the site, proving that the tradition of carving ruler portraits in basalt was still seen as a vital part of a king's legitimacy. But these heads are different. The artistry is perhaps less refined, the features more individualized and less idealized than the serene, godlike faces of the Venta kings. They feel more like portraits of men and less like icons of deities. The artistic style of Tres Zapote is a fascinating blend of old and new, a style that scholars often call Epa Olmec. It is a clear bridge between the classic Olmec art of the past and the emerging styles of the Maya, the Zapotec, and the great cultures that would rise in central Veracruz. It is at Tres Zapotes that we find the most concrete proof of the Olmec's intellectual legacy, the clearest evidence of the knowledge that was passed on from this dying culture to the new civilizations being born. We have spoken of the long count calendar, that profound invention for tracking linear time. The oldest securely dated example of this system was found at Tres Zapotes on a broken basalt monument known as Stela C. On one side, the stela is carved with the abstract, snarling face of a were-jaguar deity, a clear and deliberate callback to the classic art style of the Olmec Golden Age. But on the other side, the carvers inscribed a date, a column of dots and bars that, in our own calendar, corresponds to the 3rd of September, 30 Sekut BCE. This single broken stone is one of the most important monuments in Mesoamerica. It is the missing link, the Rosetta Stone that connects the artistic and religious world of the Olmecs with the mathematical and historical world of the Maya. It is proof that the most sophisticated knowledge of the Olmecs, their calendar, their mathematics, their concept of zero, survived the collapse of their great cities and was faithfully carried forward at this final, enduring outpost to be bequeathed to all of Mesoamerica. The twilight at Tres Zapotes was not just an ending, it was also the dawn of a new and different historical consciousness. That final, lonely long count date, carved at Tres Zapotes, was more than just a historical record. It was an epitaph. It was a testament to a culture that had survived, but whose great defining era was now firmly in the past. The fall of Venta around 400 BCE marked the end of the Olmecs as the dominant driving force in Mesoamerica. Their influence would echo for millennia, but their time as a coherent and powerful civilization was over. This raises the ultimate historical question: why? Why did this brilliant 1,000-year-old culture, which had built the first cities, carved the first great monuments, and conceived of the first calendars, ultimately fade into the twilight from which Tres Zapote emerged? There was no single fatal blow, but rather a slow, creeping illness, a convergence of factors that gradually eroded the foundations of their world. One of the most dramatic and compelling theories points to the sky and to the very mountains that had once been the source of their strength. The Tuxtla Mountains, where they quarried the basalt for their colossal heads and thrones, are a chain of active volcanoes. Geological evidence suggests that during the late formative period, one or more of these volcanoes may have erupted with catastrophic force. Imagine a sudden, terrifying explosion that turns the daytime sky to night, raining down a thick, gritty blanket of ash across the entire heartland. The delicate maize crops would have been smothered, the rivers choked with acidic sludge, and the air filled with poisonous gases. Such an event would have been an agricultural and ecological disaster, leading to widespread famine and disease. But more than that, it would have been an ideological catastrophe. For a people whose rulers promised to maintain the cosmic balance, a sky filled with fire and a sun blotted out by ash would have been the ultimate sign that the gods had abandoned them, that the shaman kings had lost their power. A less dramatic but equally plausible environmental culprit may have been the rivers themselves. The Olmecs, remember, were the masters of the floodplain, their civilization built upon the predictable, life-giving pulse of the annual floods. But this was a dynamic, unstable landscape. Over the course of centuries, the great rivers that watered their world could have slowly, almost imperceptibly, changed their courses. The main channel of a river, like the Tonala, might have shifted, leaving the great center of Venta stranded in an increasingly stagnant and unproductive swamp, while silting up the canoe routes that were its commercial highways. This would not be a sudden death, but a slow, agonizing starvation, a gradual decline in agricultural surplus that would make it impossible to support the large population of priests, artisans, and elites living at the capital. Another powerful theory looks beyond the heartland to the wider Mesoamerican world that the Olmecs themselves had helped to create. Their power, especially during the La Venta period, was deeply connected to their ability to control the long-distance trade networks that brought them precious, status-affirming goods like jade, obsidian, and serpentine. But by 400 BCE, the Olmecs were no longer the only complex society on the block. In the valley of Oaxaca, the Zapotecs were building their own great capital at Monte Alban. To the south, in the Maya lowlands, powerful city-states were beginning to coalesce. These new, rising powers would have begun to compete with the Olmecs, perhaps intercepting their trade routes, controlling the sources of precious materials, and offering new alliances and new ideologies to the smaller villages on the periphery. As the flow of prestige goods into the Olmec heartland slowed to a trickle, the authority of their rulers would have withered. A king who could no longer adorn himself in jade or provide obsidian blades for his priests was a king who was visibly losing his connection to the sources of sacred power. Ultimately, the cause was likely a fatal combination of all these pressures, a perfect storm of disaster. Perhaps a volcanic eruption weakened the agricultural base at the same time that new rivals were cutting off the trade routes. This combination of economic and environmental stress would have placed an unbearable strain on the Olmec social contract. The common people, faced with starvation and a ruling class that could no longer deliver on its promises of stability and divine favor, may have simply voted with their feet. They may have stopped sending tribute, abandoned the villages, and migrated away from the heartland in search of new opportunities with the rising powers in neighboring regions. The great centers would have slowly emptied out, their rituals ceasing, their plazas falling silent, until only the great stone heads were left to bear witness to a world that had, for 1,000 years, seemed eternal. That slow, inexorable fading of the great Olmec centers was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a transformation. The people themselves did not vanish from the heartland. They remained on the land of their ancestors, farming the riverbanks and fishing the estuaries, just as they had for centuries. But the grand ideological structure that had defined them, the absolute power of the shaman kings, the massive ceremonial offerings, the singular focus on the were-jaguar, had dissolved. In its place, something new began to grow, a culture that scholars call the Epi-Olmec, a name which simply means after the Olmec. For roughly 600 years, from the fall of Venta around 400 BCE to about 250 CE, these direct descendants of the Olmecs would act as a crucial bridge, a culture that both preserved the ancient legacy of their forebears and forged the new tools of civilization that would be adopted and perfected by the rising powers of the Maya and the great centers of classic Veracruz. The Epi-Olmec world was centered primarily at Tres Zapotes, that old, enduring city in the western foothills. The art and architecture of this period tell a story of a people grappling with a new identity. The breathtaking three-dimensional sculpture of the Olmec Golden Age, which seemed to pull the very soul of a ruler out of a solid block of stone, gave way to a style that was more focused on two-dimensional narrative relief, carving on large flat stone slabs or stelae. The focus of the art also shifted dramatically. While Olmec art was primarily concerned with depicting timeless, cosmological scenes and idealized rulers as divine beings, Epi-Olmec art became explicitly historical. The monuments were no longer just icons of power. They were public records, stone documents that celebrated the specific, dated achievements of named individuals. This shift toward historical narrative was made possible by the Epi-Olmec's most significant contribution, the development of a true, complex writing system. Remember the Cascajal block, that tantalizing but lonely whisper of an Olmec script? In the Epi-Olmec period, that whisper became a clear, confident voice. We can see this new script, known as the Isthmian or Epi-Olmec script, on a handful of precious surviving artifacts. One is the Tuxtla statuette, a delightful little greenstone figurine of a shaman wearing a duckbill mask, his body covered in finely incised columns of glyphs that include a long count date from the year 162 CE. But the masterpiece of this culture, their magnum opus, is a monument known as La Mujer Stela I. It is a massive 4-ton stone slab that was found in the Acula River, not far from Tres Zapotes. On it is a magnificent, full-length portrait of a richly dressed ruler who is named in the accompanying text as Harvester Mountain Lord. And flanking this portrait are more than 500 elegant glyphs arranged in 21 columns, forming one of the longest and most complex texts ever found from this early period of Mesoamerican history. Anchored by 2 long count dates, the text appears to be a detailed biography of Harvester Mountain Lord, recounting his accession to the throne, his military victories, a ritual sacrifice, and his efforts to put down a challenge to his rule. This is no longer the mythic, cyclical time of the Olmecs. This is human history, recorded with dates, names, and verbs. And yet, this voice from the past still presents us with a profound mystery. In the 1990s, two linguists, John Justison and Terence Kaufman, proposed a full decipherment of the script, arguing that it recorded an ancient form of the Mixozoquian languages, the language family believed to have been spoken by the Olmecs and their descendants. Their decipherment, based on the La Mojara text, is a monumental work of linguistic detective work. However, with so few surviving examples of the script, it is almost impossible to cross-check their work, and many other scholars remain unconvinced. The voice of Harvester Mountain Lord is there, carved in stone, but we are still arguing about the precise meaning of his words. The Epi-Olmec culture stands as a perfect symbol of a world in transition, a people who still revered the were-jaguar masks of their ancestors, but who were now more interested in carving the specific dates of their own accomplishments into the pages of history. The story of Harvester Mountain Lord, told in the elegant, still debated script of the Epi-Olmec, was one of the last great narratives to be recorded in the Old Heartland. After the 3rd century CE, the region seems to have slipped into a period of relative obscurity. The great traditions that had begun with San Lorenzo and had been carried through La Venta and Tres Zapotes finally unraveled. The people remained, but the monumental unifying culture of the Olmecs and their immediate heirs was gone. And then a profound silence fell. For more than 1,500 years, the Olmec civilization was not just gone, it was utterly forgotten. The jungle, with its relentless creeping green tendrils, reconquered their great ceremonial centers. Thick roots buckled the ancient plazas, and a blanket of soil and leaf litter slowly entombed the broken monuments. The greatest civilization of its time had vanished so completely that it did not even survive as a legend. The silence was finally broken, not by a scholar with an ancient map, but by a farm worker with a simple spade. The year was 1862. In the lush, rolling hills of the Hacienda Hueyapan, in the Mexican state of Veracruz, a man was clearing a dense patch of forest to plant a cornfield. And as he worked the soil, his tool struck something massive and unyielding just below the surface. Believing he had found the bottom of a huge, inverted iron cauldron, a kind of kettle that was sometimes used in sugar processing and was rumored to be a source of buried treasure, he called over his fellow workers. With a growing sense of excitement, they began to dig, their shovels scraping away the dense, dark earth. But as the soil fell away, they did not find the curved, rusted metal of a pot. They found the smooth, unyielding surface of carved stone. They kept digging, following the curve of the object downwards and outwards, and slowly a shape began to emerge. First, a vast curving brow, then the unmistakable arch of a closed eyelid, and then a broad, powerful nose. Finally, as the last of the dirt was cleared away, the workers found themselves standing in a pit, staring up in disbelief at what they had uncovered. It was a face, a colossal, serene, and undeniably human face, with thick lips and empty eyes, staring up at the sky for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. They had not found a treasure kettle. They had stumbled upon a silent giant, a stone ghost from a world they could not possibly have imagined. News of this bizarre discovery traveled through the region, and it eventually reached the ears of a Mexican scholar an antiquarian named Jose Maria Melgar y Serrano. Intrigued, he made the difficult journey to the hacienda to see the stone for himself. He was astounded. He measured it, drew it, and carefully documented its features. In 1869, he published his findings, introducing this incredible monument, what we now know as Tres Zapot's colossal head one, to the wider worlds. But the world, it seemed, was not quite ready for the Olmecs. Melgar, a product of his time and its scientific biases, was struck by what he perceived as African features in the statue's face. He famously and incorrectly speculated that it was a portrait of an Ethiopian, proof of an ancient transatlantic contact between the old world and the new. While his conclusion was wildly off the mark, his act of publishing the discovery was the crucial's first spark. And yet, for more than 60 years, that spark failed to catch fire. The academic world, with its attention focused on the magnificent temples of the Maya and the golden treasures of the Aztecs, paid little attention to this strange, isolated monument. It remained a curiosity, a footnote in the story of ancient Mexico. It was not until the late 1930s that a determined and brilliant archaeologist from the Smithsonian Institution, Matthew Sterling, armed with Melgar's old forgotten report, led a proper expedition back to Tres Zapotes. He re-excavated the great head and in the process began the systematic unearthing of the lost Olmec civilization, finally proving that this was not some strange anomaly, but the work of a great and ancient culture, the true mother civilization that had been sleeping all along, just beneath the soil of the Veracruz jungle. The heroic, swashbuckling era of archaeology, defined by men like Matthew Sterling, who rediscovered a civilization with little more than an old map and a team of men with machetes, laid the essential groundwork for everything we know about the Olmecs. For decades, the process of discovery continued in much the same way, slow, painstaking, and always at the mercy of the relentless jungle. Archaeologists would spend months hacking through the undergrowth, digging countless test pits, trying to understand the shape and scale of a city they could only ever see a tiny piece of at a time. The very environment that had nurtured the Olmecs became the greatest obstacle to understanding them, its dense green canopy hiding their secrets like a jealous guardian. But in the last few decades, a revolution has taken place. The tools have changed. Today's archaeologists have a suite of technologies at their disposal that would have seemed like pure magic to Sterling's generation. Tools that allow them to peer through the jungle, look beneath the soil, and trace the invisible connections of the past with astonishing precision. Using instruments like magnetometers, they can walk over a seemingly empty plaza and detect the subtle magnetic variations in the soil that reveal the location of a buried monument or a massive offering pit, all without ever lifting a shovel. By analyzing the unique chemical signature of a tiny obsidian flake, they can trace its origin to a specific volcano hundreds of miles away, turning a single artifact into a firm data point on a vast, ancient trade map. The most transformative of all these new tools, however, is a technology known as LiDAR. The name stands for light detection and ranging, but its effect is far more poetic. It gives archaeologists the power to digitally deforest the jungle. From a small airplane flying a precise grid pattern over the landscape, a LiDAR instrument fires down millions of laser pulses every second. Most of these pulses bounce off the top of the dense forest canopy, but a crucial few find their way through the gaps in the leaves to strike the forest floor and bounce back. By measuring the return time of every single one of these pulses, a computer can generate a breathtakingly accurate, three-dimensional map of the terrain. And then, the true magic happens. With a few clicks of a mouse, an analyst can instruct the software to digitally filter out every data point that represents a tree, a leaf, or a bush. In an instant, the jungle vanishes. The screen, which a moment before showed a rolling uniform sea of green, is suddenly wiped clean, revealing the naked brown earth beneath. And on that naked earth, the secrets of the past are laid bare. Suddenly, a low, unassuming hill is revealed to be a perfectly symmetrical, man-made pyramid. A slight dip in the ground becomes a sharp, straight line, the remnant of an ancient canal. The entire landscape is revealed to be what it truly is, a vast artifact, a place that was sculpted, managed, and engineered by human hands 3,000 years ago. The application of LiDAR to the Olmec heartland has been nothing short of a revelation. At San Lorenzo, it has shown that the Great Plateau was surrounded by dozens of smaller, previously unknown mounds and platforms, revealing a city far larger and more complexly organized than was ever suspected from the ground. It has uncovered a vast and intricate network of artificial reservoirs and channels, confirming the colossal scale of their water management. It has allowed researchers to see, for the very first time, the full bird-like effigy shape of the entire San Lorenzo Plateau, a cosmic design that the Olmecs themselves could have only ever held in their minds. This new vision is forcing a complete re-evaluation of their society. The old picture of a few isolated ceremonial centers ruling over a vast untamed wilderness is being replaced by a picture of a thoroughly managed and populated landscape, a true kingdom whose full extent is only now, thanks to a machine that can see through time, finally coming back into focus. That digital magic of LiDAR, which allows us to see the full, breathtaking scope of the Olmec world, reveals the physical blueprint of their civilization. We can now trace the precise outlines of their cities, the gentle rise of their ceremonial mounds, and the straight, determined lines of their ancient canals. But the true and lasting blueprint they created was not etched into the earth. It was imprinted upon the very soul of Mesoamerica. Though their cities fell silent and their own name was forgotten for 1,500 years, the echoes of their innovations, their beliefs, and their artistic vision reverberated through every single great culture that followed them, a deep and foundational hum beneath the surface of all that was to come. Their legacy is so profound and so pervasive that it can be difficult to see, much like the air we breathe. But when we look at the great civilizations of the Maya, the Zapotec, or the Aztec, we are seeing in so many ways a world built upon an Olmec foundation. The very idea of the divine king, the shaman lord who mediates between the human and supernatural worlds, which was the cornerstone of Maya and Aztec royalty, was a political model invented and perfected at San Lorenzo and La Venta. The iconic regalia of power, the reverence for jade, the magnificent feathered headdresses, the association with the mighty jaguar, all began as the exclusive cultural property of the Olmec elite. The great Mesoamerican traditions of art and architecture are a direct inheritance. The concept of a sacred city, a ceremonial center with pyramids for mountains and plazas for the primordial sea was an Olmec invention. The enduring tradition of carving stone monuments to record the deeds and faces of rulers began with those colossal heads staring out across the plazas of the heartland and continued in the elaborate stele of the Maya kings 1,000 years later. The central tenets of their cosmology, the three-tiered universe, the sacred world tree, the cave as a portal to the underworld, all became foundational beliefs for nearly every culture that followed. The great feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, whose worship would one day spread across all of Mexico, likely has his origins in the Olmec dragon. The powerful rain gods of later cultures, with their goggled eyes and snarling mouths, are the direct descendants of the Olmec word jaguar. The most sacred rituals that defined Mesoamerican life for 3 millennia were born on the Gulf Coast. The sacred ball game, with its heavy rubber ball and its life and death stakes, was an Olmec pastime that became a pan-Mesoamerican obsession. The solemn duty of rulers to perform ritual bloodletting, nourishing the gods with their own life force to maintain the cosmic order, was a practice that began as a core expression of Olmec royal piety, and perhaps most importantly, the intellectual tools of civilization, the brilliant long count calendar, the base 20 mathematical system, and that revolutionary concept of zero were all developed and passed on from the Olmec and Epi-Olmec, providing the framework for the stunning astronomical and historical achievements of the classic Maya. Whether they were a single mother culture or the most influential of a family of sister cultures, the Olmecs were the people who set the terms of the conversation, the ones who created the cultural grammar that everyone else would use to write their own epic stories. And so, our long journey through their world comes to a quiet end. The story that began in the humid air of the riverine floodplain now settles into the stillness of the night. The voices of the rulers and the priests have long since faded, and the sound of stone hammers on basalt is gone. But in the deep, velvety darkness of the Veracruz jungle, the great stone heads remain. They are no longer objects of power or reverence, but silent, patient witnesses to the immense passage of time. Imagine them now, their heavy brows and full lips softened by moonlight, their ancient eyes seeming to gaze at a sky full of unfamiliar stars. They are sleeping, dreaming of a world of jaguar shamans and buried jade, a world that now exists only in the quiet spaces of our imagination. The story is over. The echoes remain. And now it is time for you too to rest. Wishing you peace, tranquility, and the deepest of dreams.